Hi, this is Andy. Let's start with this question. When you don't have enough time, what's the first thing that gets cut from your schedule? Now, of course, the answer is it depends, but I asked this question recently on LinkedIn and got a flood of responses. And the most common category was self-care, exercising, sleeping, even eating. And two other big categories were time with others and time to think. Now, maybe you can relate to those. I mean, left to my own devices, I sure can. But when you think about it, you would never design your life that way, right? I mean, each of those represent areas that are critical to our success. And I'm not just talking about success with our projects or at work. If we're not taking care of ourselves, taking time to think and reflect and investing in others, it impacts nearly every dimension of life. And it can lead us to hitting a birthday and wondering, how did I get here? Well, if that sounds like a depressing start to the episode, I've got good news, okay? So I'm joined today by the author of one of my favorite new books. Cassie Holmes joins us to talk about her book, Happier Hour, How to Beat Distraction, Expand Your Time, and Focus on What Matters Most. What I expected to be just another time management guide turns out to be a book on happiness that I consider a must-read. In today's discussion, Cassie will talk about what the main drivers of happiness are, and they may not be exactly what you think. She'll talk about the role of relationships in our happiness, but even more specifically about how to invest in them despite how busy you are. And along the way, you'll get ideas and tools to help you apply the learning, including the times left exercise. You don't want to miss that one. I can't wait to share this discussion with you. Hey, quick question. Have you ever considered becoming a speaker? Have you ever gone to a conference or sat through a workshop and thought, I think I could do that? I ask because we're looking to expand our facilitator team. If you've got a passion for helping people learn how to lead teams and deliver projects, send an email to show@peopleandprojectspodcast.com. This might just be the next step to adding some more happiness to your career. Let's start that conversation at show@peopleandprojectspodcast.com. Thanks. Well, let's jump into today's discussion with Cassie Holmes about her new book, Happier Hour. Cassie, thank you for joining us on the People and Projects Podcast.
Oh, thanks so much, Andy. I'm excited to be here.
Me too. You know, before we get into the book, I'd love for our listeners to learn more about you. So my understanding is you were referred to as Little Miss Happiness as you grew up. Okay. So we know that personality plays into this for sure, but can you think of anything from your family culture or experiences growing up that might have formed you in some ways to now be one of the most influential researchers and voices on happiness?
Well, I think that as I shared in the book, and as you just noted, I've always been sort of particularly cheery. I do see the glass as half full most of the time, find the silver lining in everything, at least try to. And I, as my husband describes, sunshine powered. I do well with bright, sunny environments. And a big part of that is my natural disposition. And like, if you look at the research, or what are some of these inputs or determinants of people's happiness, and our natural disposition plays a significant role. But I also think it's important for folks to know that it's not all our natural disposition. And also it's important for folks to know it's not all our circumstances, because so many, as I teach this course to our MBAs, applying the science of happiness to life design, and I start the course of like, what do you think would, if only this, then you would be happier? They are pointing to like circumstances. If only I had a lot more money. If only I was super gorgeous. If only I had that big house. If only, among my MBAs, if only I found that person I wanted to marry, then I would be happier. But these circumstances do have some effect, but a significantly smaller one than we predict. And then this is going to your question, I'm not shirking it, is there's another big input, and this is, that is up to our decisions of how we think and behave in the day-to-day. And I tie that to how do we spend our time and think about our time. And the reason I think this is so important, because while I grew up Little Miss Happiness, That's not to say that all circumstances in my life were happy. And that's absolutely not to say that every day I was in a sunny, cheery environment at all. But along with my natural disposition, I think more important is that I do have a sense of agency, that I know that, and this is now based off of lots of science that some of what I've conducted to inform how, I know that we can make decisions about how we spend our time, how we engage in our time to feel more joy in our days, as well as more satisfaction in our lives. So I think I don't know if that actually,
it
as I'm
does.
looking back on, I did answer your question. But
No, actually, you got it. The one thing that caught my eye, it was just a small little reference made in the book, but your mother, Vicky, how she taught the importance of moments in anything. And that, to me, that's agency, right? It's not just the big winning something. It was maybe the smell the roses moment that she
yeah.
got into you too. Would you say that she had, I don't know, and maybe we're just rewriting history by looking back, but I don't know.
No, I mean, my mom, Vicky, the thing that her gift is finding celebrations. She created celebrations throughout like anything. And sometimes it was like frustrating. I'm like, there's some practical things that we need to consider too. But I mean, she exposed us to some pretty incredible experiences just to make the most out of life. I mean, my brother and I, she moved us to, we lived in Sun Valley, Idaho for my first grade year because that's where we vacationed. And she was like, wouldn't it be fun to live here? So we lived there. And then we realized, or she realized that actually, being on vacation, and which actually ties back to an insight from the book.
Exactly.
Day in and day out is not a source of happiness. And so then we moved to London and we lived in England for 6 years. And that was a fantastic, eye-opening and enriching experience. And then, so all thanks to my mom's sort of search for, positive experiences.
I love it. We have 5 kids. Our third is a daughter. She just recently got married, and she and her husband, one of their core values is moment making. That seems very Vicky like how do we make a moment in this situation? So they're known for like confetti cannons, and it was just kind of fun. But then there's always that you have to clean up there. So there are times where, like you were saying, there's the good. It's not a bad part. It's lovely. It's just a lovely part. But I just want to bring this up because I think sometimes people think, well, this is easy for you, Cassie, because you're Little Miss Sunshine, or this is easy because you had this or that. But your point about agency, we'll get into that a little bit more. I learned so much about what happiness actually means through your book. But could I ask you this? What does happiness not mean? Because I think it's easy to maybe misinterpret that. What do you think?
Yeah. And I think that the sort of searching for something better, this pursuit of happiness is what I do not mean. And it's not a sort of fleeting, frivolous pursuit, even at that. What I mean by happiness is what we refer to in the literature as subjective well-being. So that includes both feeling more positive than negative emotion in our moments, in our day. So feeling joy during our experiences, as well as feeling satisfied about our experiences, about our day. So there's both this emotional as well as cognitive or evaluative component. And I think that that's really important because the name of the book, Happier Hour, is very purposeful, like happier. It's not you turn happiness on or off. It is what decisions can you make to make you feel better in your days and more satisfied about your life. So it's sort of a relative to where you are now. And happier, it's really what I'm hoping to sort of help people find is joy in their moments as well as satisfaction about their lives.
Yeah, that's good. What was the Kahneman reference? It was happy in your life and happy with or
about your life.
About your life, yeah. So it's both. Like it's the moment, but it's also the trajectory in some ways. Trajectory
Well,
might not be the right
more
word.
Instead of trajectory, it's more like it's the moment as well as when you look back, how do you view it? So it's that storytelling, that narrative. And I think I will like Danny Kahneman and his work, it has been so profoundly impactful for me. And he sort of pulled out these two components of it. And sort of reached a point where it's like, it's sort of like, from a research perspective, it becomes quite problematic because, like, what is the outcome that you're really looking to achieve? But I actually think what I want is for people to invest in those activities that both make you feel happy in the moment and that you reflect on with satisfaction. And so that you sort of can live your life and design your life and reflect back on your life so that there's both joy and fulfillment. So I don't see them at odds with each other. I think that it's really about finding the places where they are married. And it doesn't have to be in every single moment that it's both joy and fulfillment, but looking across the weeks, looking across the years, that there are both. That's what I'm going for.
I love it. And you deliver really well in the book, because I think a lot of books that are time management focused are about the moment or optimizing the day or productivity, but for what end? And so there's just so many ideas in here that can help. But as we kind of talked about, there's some obvious big chunks to happiness. So there is personality and there are circumstances, but that third factor, which you've kind of touched on, is determined by what we think and what we do. And I'm interested, what surprises your students when you talk about these three categories? Anything
the thing that's surprising is that circumstances don't play the biggest role. And then actually, compared to those other two buckets, it plays the smallest role. Because with this idea, like, if only I made a lot more money or got a lot of money, then I would be happier. Because a lot of my students, they're MBAs, so they're doing this degree to make more money. But what the research shows is that having not enough money is important, as in not being able to meet your basic needs is a great source of unhappiness. So you need to sort of be able to put food on the table, have a shelter in a place that feels safe. But beyond those things, more money doesn't translate into as much happiness as we think. And so that's surprising, because folks are sort of looking for that silver bullet, that if only this, then I will be happier, super happy, and happy forever. But our happiness doesn't work that way. Even if something does have a big impact initially, we get used to it over time. We adapt. And so I talk about the role of hedonic adaptation, which is so important for us to keep in mind. And what that is it's our psychological propensity to get used to things over time. So when you do the same thing again and again, you're with the same person again and again, that stops having the same emotional impact. And it's really good that we adapt in the face of negative circumstances, because it makes us resilient. But it's bad when it makes it so that those circumstances, those experiences that initially brought joy and promised so much joy, if we don't even notice them, then that's something that we need to be aware of, so that we continue to experience the happiness in our days.
I don't know if Abraham Lincoln actually said it, but you have the quote in the book, something along the lines that people are about as happy as they choose to be, or it's something
as they make up their minds to be.
And I've had discussions with people before, Cassie, where we're talking about, is happiness a choice or not? And a lot of times people, and by the way, I'm not judging when someone's going through really difficult circumstances, right? But they're like, no, it's not a choice. And so I think that's a bitter pill to swallow at times, isn't it? You share in the book some really difficult things you went through, but you've had to learn that you can do happiness, I think, is the terminology you use.
Yeah. Right? And that's where that sense of agency comes from. And it's not, I am absolutely not suggesting that there will be moments, there will be days, and in some cases, months and some years that are quite unhappy. But we have agency in determining how sort of smoothly we get through those times, how quickly, and even during those times, there are some sort of moments of joy and finding humor, but really also finding those sort of sources of what you can feel grateful for or satisfied with, even sort of in light of all of the other sort of bad stuff.
Yeah. And you're not immune to it. I'm not, and anyone listening to it's not immune to that. But I just want to be clear, it's not a book about fluff or
No.
Princess Unikitty from the Lego movie or whatever. It's not about this out of touch view of life. It is in the midst of actual real world life that this stuff it applies. Do you remember? Yeah, of course you remember, but there's a page as a chart of Daniel Kahneman's 900 working women of their analyzing their activities. You adapted it then, if I understand it right, to findings that said not just how much fun or how much they enjoyed it vertically, but horizontally, it was also about meaning to it. So I posted a picture of that chart on LinkedIn, and it led to a fascinating discussion with colleagues, like many comments. But people need to get a copy of the book to appreciate what we're going to talk about. But what are some of your favorite observations from those findings, either where things were vertically or horizontally, or what you found talking to students about it?
Yeah, I think that, and as you said, I'm sort of pulling data together from different studies to sort of visually depict the sources of positivity, whether it's enjoyment, and I claim it as fun versus unfun, and meaningful versus not meaningful. Whereas in the research, the White and Dolan, they describe it as rewarding versus not rewarding. But I think what's really powerful about it is when you see it laid out, the correlation is quite high. So, I mean, I don't know if others, like oftentimes people look at the outliers, but if what you see is that the things that tend to be more fun, also like there are things that are really rewarding, and it's those things that I'm like most excited about, like those things that are both rewarding and both meaningful and fun. And that's where social connection really comes through, and it comes through again and again in like different, even not just research, but different, philosophy, religion, theology, of this critical role that having authentic sense of connection and belonging plays in our emotional well-being. Even actually a neat study, longitudinal study, the Harvard study of adult development, where it's tracking a cohort of men over the course of their lives, 75 years. And what they found was the single biggest predictor of satisfaction in life was not fortune. So, addressing my MBA's like incoming, thoughts, nor was it fame. It was having strong supportive relationships. And so I think that is something that's really important to take out of even like that graph that I shared, that there are these ways of spending that are both fun and meaningful. And then it also points to some of these fun but not meaningful ways of spending that take up a lot of our time, namely, and even when that research was done, like social media didn't show up, but when I have my students track their time, and like binge watching TV, like, yes, the first half hour is totally delightful, but as you're 3 and 4 hours in on, the fourth night that week, it's actually not that satisfying. And so I think that it points to opportunities of where some hours that we could reallocate towards these more fulfilling hours. And then it also points at opportunities in those, unfun activities that actually are necessary, and work, which shows up as potentially meaningful, but a lot of people feel like a lot of their days are not fun. And I think there's so much opportunity there of how do we restructure or reframe or, devise those hours so that they are more rewarding and feel more fun. And so it's not just hours that you're waiting through, but you can actually experience them as enjoyable. And some of that comes from identifying the meaning in it.
Yeah. Some of the common themes that people replied was surprising how low work was on the meeting. So you just kind of addressed that one. There was some hilarious arguments about cooking versus eating.
Yeah.
Because as people listening might guess, cooking or eating was really fun, but other people are like, eating is meaningful. So I thought that was funny. A number of people mentioned it wasn't a surprise that intimacy was high, but they were surprised it was on the midpoint and not towards more meaning. And so I was wondering if there was just not data for that or something like that. But I guess the interesting thing overall to me was,
but that, to be clear, that's physical intimate. It's like sex.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, but still, as one person said, if it's done well, it ought to be more to the right there. It was, and I'm not saying this to be provocative. I'm just saying, that could be hedonic adaptation, I suppose, too, right? Of just of all these things. Well, I guess to pull myself out of that conversation here, Cassie, is what a number of people said was, well, these aren't my circles. And your point in the book is, of course not. Those are averages. Where do you want the circles to be? I think is more of the point, isn't it?
I think it is absolutely. Those are based off of averages for the average person, as well as the average instantiation of that activity. Yeah. But clearly, not every work hour is the same. Not every time you're socializing is the same. And so what I absolutely encourage folks to do is to track their own time. Yeah. And I describe this in detail in the book, and even there's a worksheet that is like super, like not technologically advanced, but very accessible, so over the course of a week, write down for each half hour, what are you doing? And being more specific than work versus socializing, or even being more specific than like cooking or eating, like where are you eating, with whom are you eating, and then in addition, not just writing down what you're doing, but rating on a 10-point scale. Having spent your time coming out of that activity, how do you feel? How satisfied, how fulfilled, how positive? And this is, while somewhat tedious to collect your own data, it is so worth it, because at the end of the week, you have your personalized data set. So you can look across your activities or across your time and be like, okay, what are those ways of spending that made me feel the most sad, like that got your highest ratings? And not just the activities themselves, but what are some commonalities across your happiest activities? And also, what are some commonalities across your least happy activities? So you'll potentially get some insights. Like, for instance, I found out that it was one-on-one time actually was my source of happiness. Like, whether with my family, I love my one-on-one dates, whether with friends too. Actually, I love those one-on-one conversations. Group dinners are less satisfying for me.
All faculty meetings you hate. Right?
Pardon?
All faculty meetings you don't like.
All faculty meetings, yes. And also even like faculty lunches, like it's a group of people, I come away feeling drained, whereas like a walk to get coffee or bubble tea with a colleague where we're talking about our research, like that is a great source of joy. So you can identify for yourself these sources of satisfaction. You can also see just how much time you're spending across your various activities. So you can see what are those times that you're basically wasting. Like my students, when they do this, social media, this is the thing. They're like, I cannot believe I spent that much time. I thought it was just a few minutes here, but those few minutes here turn up to like a half hour here. And then you add them together and then it's like hours that are here and there. And they have this sort of notion that like, oh, that's my fun time. But then they look at their ratings and they're like, actually, it didn't make me feel that great.
Mhm.
And for all of us who feel time poor, like we don't have enough time to do what we want to and sort of need to do, that's a great opportunity to be like, okay, these are hours that are not necessary, nor are they fun,
Yeah.
that are actually available to reallocate towards these activities that now you know, because you have data, are actually great sources of satisfaction and joy for you.
Yeah, I'm a couple days into the exercise. I can't wait. In fact, my 13-year-old daughter, I was talking to her today. She goes, "Dad, what's that?" And I told her, and she goes, "You're not going to make us do that." I'm like, "Yeah, I think I might," because I think it might be interesting to see what they find. You know, they're like at school, but there's certain things in school they like more than other things, and so I think it's just,
Absolutely.
yeah,
I
yeah.
actually think it's really helpful for teenagers to do it because they're in the phase of life where they're sort of learning their preferences. And even as adults, like we think we know what we like, but actually oftentimes the data that doesn't bear out. But as, you know, a high schooler who is starting to identify what is it that actually is fulfilling, what's like intrinsically motivating, that can be really informative for like what classes they sign up for, what activities they say yes to, so that it's not just this, what we tend to do of sort of like over schedule without even thinking about what's filling the schedule, but instead being proactive and saying yes to those things, or even seeking out those activities that are going to be fulfilling. And so I think, I'm sorry to your daughter, but I do think you should make her do
Sorry,
it.
not sorry. No, I'm looking forward to it. In fact, I'll try to remember to follow up with you on it. But this thing about friendships, and I think I've written it off in the past, Cassie, is, well, I'm a guy, you know, and that's a lame excuse. But I feel like I can send a text to my best friend and we're actually pretty good. You know? But one thing I was struck by your book is it's not just the mere presence of being with someone, it's the quality of the connecting. And so I'm interested if you'd be willing to share this. What are some things you personally do, whether it's with students or friends or loved ones, to make your time with them more meaningful?
Yeah. There's a couple things that I do. One is super simple, is carving them out as no phone zones. So often we are distracted from what we're doing. There's interesting research by Dan Gilbert and Matt Killingsworth where they would ping people over the course of their day and ask, what are you doing? And what are you thinking about? As in, are you thinking about something else? And how happy are you? And what they found is that we are sort of distracted, not thinking about what we're currently doing, almost half of the time, 47% of the time. And it's not based off the activity. So even the fun things that we're doing, our mind tends to wander. And so, and a culprit of being distracted are our phones. Like our phones are so useful because they let us do anything at any moment, but also the mere presence of them makes us feel like we maybe could and should be doing something else at every moment. And so putting the phones away during these times so that not distracted, to fully engaged, and not only, and there's actually a neat experiment by Liz Dunn and her colleagues where they had friends dining together and they instructed some to put their phones away out of sight, like in their bag, not on the table. And the other control condition, they had their phones on the table, which is actually what we generally do, right?
Sure.
And what they found is that those whose phones were away enjoyed the dining experience more because they were more engaged. Those with the phones on the table enjoyed the dining experience less because they were distracted. So something as simple as that is when you're spending time, when I spend time with the people that I love so much, whether, you know, one of my kids or at our family, at our dinners, phones are absolutely away. Another really important thing is recognizing, especially for these family members whom we love so much, they're family members, so they're around all the time. And because they're in our day-to-day life and so embedded in it, we think they will be there in exactly that way and sharing in those experiences. like evermore, but that's not true. Time is passing. And so, and we are, as I mentioned, we're subject to hedonic adaptation. And so even those joyful activities, we stop noticing them as much. And so one way to offset hedonic adaptation is to count how many times do you actually have left to do this activity that you enjoy. And oftentimes, actually, as I have another exercise in the book, is to reflect over the last 2 weeks. What were those sort of times that you felt the most joy? So often there are these ordinary experiences, these sort of like breakfast with the family, putting, reading your kid to bed. For me, my coffee date with my daughter. But if you count your times left, so calculate how many times have you done it in your life thus far, then estimate how many times do you have left to do this in your life, accounting for the fact that circumstances in your life will change. Right. And if it involves someone else, circumstances in their life will change. And then counting what percentage of your total times do you have left. And more often than not, it's much more limited than we predict and that we think. And with that recognition, what it does is it makes us pay attention to savor those moments, recognizing that even though, like your 5-year-old wants to cuddle in your bed now, and you're like, oh my God, I need sleep, let's not cuddle. But recognizing that in just a few years, they will get mad at you if you try to cuddle in their bed.
That's a perfect example. Yeah.
And recognizing that these phases will change. Are those family dinners, like now they are everyday occurrences, but at some point they're going to have these activities in the evenings that, mess up family dinners, and no one's going to be at the table at the same time. And then they're going to go off to college. And then, so recognizing that these ordinary, like these sources of joy that are shared with these people that we love, that are in our day-to-day life, they are in fact precious. And also, I think it's important to note that so often when we're spending our time, we're driven by what's urgent, irrespective of its importance. Yeah. And what I think is really important that people do is actually figure out what's important to drive their decisions. And like dinner with your family might not seem urgent, but it is important. And so it's so easy to sort of be like, it's okay if I miss it here and here and here, because there are these other urgent things like a work meeting or but by counting times left, you realize those important things are in fact more urgent than we tend to realize.
My understanding is there's a Stoic meditation. It's called the last time meditation. And the idea is when you go through something, you try to take the mindset, this is the last time. So I tried that for about 2 weeks. I just experimented with it. It was actually kind of depressing. I mean, it does have the benefit of trying to keep you in the moment for sure. But the times left is so much better, I think, because you still get the same benefit of realizing there's scarcity to this, but you also you can savor it without being like, this is the last time.
This is the last time. Right.
Yeah. So, I don't know. You have any thoughts about that idea?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can, that sort of thinking that every second is the last time can get quite draining.
Yeah.
And
this is your last interview, Cassie.
I know. But the overall notion of recognizing that, like, what are those moments that are important? What are those things that will ultimately matter? And so that you make the time for them and pay attention during them. That's what we're going for.
For sure. I reached out to my two of my sisters today just because of the times left. I started doing some math on it. So, and it kind of reminds me a little bit of the time jar metaphor that you use in the book. Yeah. And Stephen Covey influenced me earlier on with it. He told that story of variation of it. But the idea is that there's a jar, you put golf balls in it. It looks like it's full, but no, you can add little stones to it. And is it full? No, you can add some sand. And the metaphor being the big things, right? There's not room for those if we fill it with sand. I'm interested from your perspective, What's tempting sand for you, Cassie, in your life? What's the tempting
Yeah. Well, the thing about sand, and that analogy is so powerful and sticky, and I share it too because I think it's really powerful, is that sand isn't tempting. It happens without us even realizing it. And the problem is that our time gets filled up with stuff without us even thinking about it. But when you put the sand in first, then you don't have time for the golf balls, for all of those things that really matter. And so my sand, the stuff that fills my time without me realizing it, is my email inbox. And sand is really dangerous because what happens is that when our time gets filled up, then it's like we spend the weeks and we're like, oh my God, we're so busy, because we've been doing a lot of things, but we don't feel fulfilled. Like looking back, it's like, oh, I actually, while busy, I didn't spend on those things that really mattered to me. That like I worked a lot, quote unquote, because I was responding to those millions of emails and in meetings, I didn't actually get the work that mattered done. That strategic work for me, it's like actually creating this space to like digest, a set of findings and figure out what's going on, or to write, and so it's so important to recognize what your sand is so you can be careful. But I actually think that the more important thing is to identify what your golf balls are, so that you put them into your schedule, you protect the time for it, and not just the time, you like set up, like, as I talked about the important work, like in those hours in your workday, it's like protect them, no meetings, but also turn off your email, put your phone away, because there's no chance that you're going to get into flow, like, that space where you're so engaged in what you're doing, you're working at your best, you're the most creative, most productive. There's no way you're going to get that really deep thinking, important work done if email or sand had filled your entire week, which it would otherwise. So I think that it's important to be sort of wary of what the sand is. There's also like the never ending incoming requests, right?
Yeah, sure.
Because, like as you do well in whatever task it is, then you will be asked to do more. But just because you're asked to do it doesn't mean that that is a job or task that you should prioritize. So what's really important, and I talk about how do you identify your golf balls, and even in the work context, and it's through identifying your purpose. What is it ultimately that matters to you? What is that sort of higher order goal, that the impact, the meaning of your work that you are looking to have, and use that as your filter of like, okay, is this task or request, is it going to sort of serve, or is like, propel me towards a little closer towards reaching that goal? Is it in line with my purpose? If not, then maybe it is something you say no to.
So if somebody wants to meet for you on a Thursday morning, the answer is no, because you have a date with your daughter. If it's a Friday night, no, I've got a date with your husband. So it's, but actually, I think it's in that chapter. Do I recall that women maybe have trouble saying no more than men? And so the sand might be a little bit more of a threat. Is that a fair statement?
Yes. So there is work that shows that in at least the research that I was relaying, that women are asked more because they are more likely to say yes. But those tasks and jobs aren't necessarily the promotable ones, or I would frame it in the work that's actually in line with their skills and their purpose. And the reason it's so dangerous is because if you are saying yes to these incoming requests that aren't going to sort of serve your firm or your personal sort of career, you're not going to have any time left for those tests that will do that.
Yeah.
And then therefore you won't get promoted. And that's what you see in the data, that it has. So it is absolutely important to not just learn how to say no, but what to say no to. And when there's that sort of needling of guilt, to remind yourself that it is so important, because what you're really setting out to do is make the bigger impact through the time that you have. And you do have limited time, so you can't say yes to everything.
That's good. So many more things I'd like to ask you, but let's end with this. We have a lot of parents who listen to the podcast. What are some ways that you and your husband are trying to teach your son and daughter these things about happiness as they are growing?
Yeah. It is a lot through role modeling. And on it, like those no phone zones, carving out time that it is both they are off their devices, but we are off our devices. And it allows us, it creates that space for us to fully connect. And they are excited now about the attention that they get from us. I'm sure, it's an uphill battle, but I actually think that that's learning how to get off devices, disconnect for sort of deliberate periods of time, so that they can fully connect with what they're doing and whom they're with.
Yeah, it's a good one. For those listening, we've only touched on just a few of the ideas in this book. I consider Cassie Holmes' book, Happier Hour, to be a must read. Add it to your reading list. It'll benefit you, those you love, even those you lead at work. I put links to the book and Cassie's website in the show notes for this cast. So Cassie, thank you for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.